You won't believe what happened when a simple family dinner left me with just a bag of leftovers. Before I tell you how I turned that moment of rejection into a $1 million bakery dream, make sure you subscribe and smash the like button, because this is one story you have to see to believe. The night of the family dinner, I wore my best blouse, light blue with little embroidered flowers. I had even curled my hair, something I hadn't done in months. My sister, Melissa, was already there when I arrived, laughing loudly at the table, her gold earrings catching every bit of light. My mom was in the kitchen finishing the mashed potatoes, and when she saw me, she gave a quick nod, like I was the delivery person, not her daughter. Dinner was loud and messy: roasted chicken, corn casserole, sweet tea, and too many stories about Melissa's new internship. I smiled and nodded, but I barely said a word. I tried to bring up my new part-time job at the bookstore, but no one really reacted. Melissa's voice always drowned mine out. After dessert, a dry chocolate cake from the grocery store, my mom cleared her throat. She was holding an envelope. Everyone turned quiet. "I've been saving this for a while," she said. "Melissa, I'm proud of you. For all your effort." She handed my sister the envelope, and Melissa gasped. "Oh my God, no way. Is this real?" It was. A set of car keys. A silver Honda Civic was parked outside with a red bow on the hood. Everyone clapped. My aunt took pictures. My mom beamed. And I just sat there, frozen. Then she turned to me. No smile. No warmth. "There's some leftovers in the kitchen. Make sure you take them home." That was it. I carried the plastic bag in silence as I walked to the bus stop. I didn't have a car. I didn't even have enough for an Uber. I waited in the cold, the mashed potatoes cooling in my lap, and wondered how I could feel so invisible in a room full of people who shared my blood. But maybe, just maybe, being invisible wasn't the end. Maybe it was the start of something I had yet to discover. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my old twin bed in my shared apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of the dinner. The sound of everyone laughing, the flash of the car keys, my mom's empty eyes, it looped in my mind like a cruel movie I couldn't shut off. The next morning, I opened the fridge and saw the leftovers from the dinner sitting on the top shelf. I closed the door without touching them. It wasn't the first time I had felt that kind of sting. Growing up, Melissa always had a new dress for picture day. I got her hand-me-downs. She went to summer camp. I stayed home and helped clean. At the time, I told myself it was just coincidence. That maybe my mom didn't realize what she was doing. But last night, it was too clear to ignore. That cold stare, it told me everything. At work that day, I moved slowly through the bookstore aisles. I usually loved shelving new arrivals, smelling the pages, overhearing customers talk about their favorite authors. But today, I felt like a background character in everyone's story, like my life was something people skipped over. During lunch, I sat behind the store in the alleyway, knees tucked to my chest. I thought about calling my mom. Maybe ask why. Maybe ask if I had done something wrong. But my fingers never moved. I just sat there, chewing the inside of my cheek, trying not to cry. I started to think about what I wanted. Really wanted. Not what would make her proud. Not what Melissa already had. Just me. What did I want that no one else could take? That night, I pulled out an old notebook. It still had glitter on the cover, from high school. Inside were old recipes I had written down with my grandma before she passed. Lemon cookies. Cinnamon twists. Her famous vanilla drop biscuits. I ran my fingers over her handwriting on the edges of the page. I could almost hear her voice saying, "A cookie made with care can heal a tired heart." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. A real smile. Not because someone gave me something, but because I remembered who I was before the cold stares and empty dinners. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready to stop waiting for a seat at their table and start building one of my own. 3 days after the dinner, I packed a duffel bag and moved out of the apartment I shared with two people who barely spoke to me. I didn't have a solid plan, just a strong need to feel free. I found a tiny studio apartment above a dry cleaner's in a quieter part of town. The carpet smelled like detergent and the bathroom light flickered, but it was mine. No stairs. No leftovers. Just silence and space. I spent my first night there sitting on the floor with a cup of instant noodles, thinking about all the things I'd let go of, trying to please my mom, waiting for her approval, comparing myself to Melissa. I wrote one thing on a sticky note and stuck it to the wall: build something that belongs to you. The next morning, I applied for a job at a local cafe 2 blocks down. I didn't have barista experience, but I offered to learn anything. The manager, a woman named Denise, smiled and said, "We're short on help. You start tomorrow." That cafe became my new world. It wasn't fancy, but it smelled like fresh espresso and cinnamon rolls every morning. I wore an apron too big for me and burned my hand on the steamer twice in the first week, but I started to like the rhythm. The customers, the warmth, the constant hum of machines and voices, it was comforting. Then one day, during my afternoon shift, a man came in and sat by the window. Gray hair, worn blazer, eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. He ordered black coffee and nothing else. When I handed it to him, he looked at me and said, "You've got quiet eyes. Like someone who's been talked over a lot." I laughed softly and said, "That's one way to put it." He introduced himself. Mr. Harold. Retired teacher. He said he came in often, but this was the first time I noticed. He stayed for an hour, reading a newspaper and occasionally glancing outside like he was waiting for something. When he left, he said, "You should write things down. The quiet ones always have the best stories." I didn't know it yet, but that man would soon become one of the most important people in my life. And for the first time, I started to feel that maybe, just maybe, the world had more to offer than what I'd been given at that dinner table. Mr. Harold came in every single day after that. Same time. Same black coffee. Same quiet seat by the window. At first, we just exchanged polite greetings. But over time, our conversations grew longer. He always asked how my day was going, and waited for the real answer, not just the automatic fine. He told me stories about the high school where he used to teach literature. About students who reminded him of me, quiet, thoughtful, overlooked. I asked him why he always sat by the window. He shrugged and said, "Waiting for something unexpected. It's how good stories begin." One slow afternoon, we got to talking about food. I told him how my grandma used to make the most amazing cookies, soft lemon ones with powdered sugar that melted on your tongue. I smiled just remembering them. "You ever make them now?" he asked. I shook my head. "Haven't in years. Didn't feel like anyone cared." He leaned in slightly. "Well, I care. Bring me one tomorrow. I'll be your first customer." I laughed, but that night, I went to the grocery store. I bought lemons, butter, flour. Back in my little apartment, I pulled out my old recipe notebook and followed my grandma's notes exactly. My kitchen was too small, and I had to use a fork to mix the dough because I didn't own a mixer, but by midnight, a tray of imperfect, golden cookies sat on the counter. The next day, I placed 2 in a paper napkin and handed them to Mr. Harold when he arrived. He took one bite, closed his eyes, and said, "This tastes like love." I don't know why, but I almost teared up right there behind the counter. Later that day, Denise, the cafe manager, walked by, grabbed one off the tray I'd brought to share, and raised her eyebrows. "Did you make these?" I nodded nervously. "These are incredible. You ever think about selling them?" The question echoed in my head for hours. That night, I wrote 3 words on a new sticky note and added it to the wall: "Start with cookies." Maybe my story wasn't about being left out of someone else's spotlight. Maybe it was about creating my own warmth, one cookie at a time. The next morning, I brought a small Tupperware of lemon cookies to work, not for the customers, just for the staff. Denise took another bite and said, "You've got something here. If you're serious, I'll let you set up a little basket on the counter. No pressure. We'll just see if people bite." My heart raced. I'd never sold anything I made before. The idea of strangers trying my cookies felt like standing naked in front of a crowd. But I nodded and said, "Okay. I'll try." That night, I stayed up baking. I didn't have proper packaging, so I used wax paper, ribbon from an old gift box, and a roll of brown paper bags I found in a drawer. I wrote Lemon Love on each one in Sharpie. The next day, I placed a small basket next to the register with a handwritten sign, "Homemade cookies, $1.50. By noon, the basket was empty. Customers kept asking, "Do you have more of those lemon cookies?" I had to keep apologizing and promising I'd bring more tomorrow. Denise looked at me with a proud smirk and said, "Told you." Mr. Harold bought 2. He left the second on the tip jar with a note, "For someone who needs a little sweetness today." After work, I walked home with tired feet and dough under my nails, but I felt something I hadn't felt in years: joy. Not just a good mood, but the kind of quiet joy that comes from doing something that matters to you, and seeing it matter to someone else. I called my grandma's old friend, Miss Judy, and asked if I could borrow her standing mixer. She sounded thrilled and said, "Honey, I've been waiting for someone to ask for that thing for years." With her mixer in my notebook, I started experimenting again: cinnamon sugar cookies, vanilla maple, even a risky chili chocolate batch. Some flopped. Some flew. But each batch taught me something new. By the end of the month, Denise gave me a dedicated shelf. She called it Hannah's Corner. Customers started asking for me by name. Not because I worked the register, but because they wanted my cookies. Every night, I stared at my wall of sticky notes. Build something that belongs to you. Start with cookies. Now, I added a third, they noticed. Not her, but me. The girl who once got a cold stare and a bag of leftovers had just made her first $100 doing what she loved. And that was only the beginning. The momentum didn't stop. Week after week, the cookies kept selling out. Customers started placing pre-orders. Some left notes with their coffee cups: "Best part of my day, tastes like home, please make more." One woman even asked if I could bake a batch for her son's birthday party. I said yes, and she paid me up front, in cash, with a smile. Every time someone complimented the cookies, I thought about my grandma. I imagined her standing beside me in my tiny kitchen, laughing gently, wiping flour off her hands. Her voice echoed in my heart, "Bake like you mean it." One Saturday, while I was restocking the shelf, Denise came over with a stack of papers. "You've got a following," she said. "I think it's time you consider making this a real business." My chest tightened. "Like, official?" "Official. I'll help you figure out the paperwork." "You've got something special, Hannah." The word special stuck with me all day. Later that week, Mr. Harold came in with a small white box. Inside was a custom rubber stamp, a lemon with a little heart in the center. "Thought your bags could use a signature," he said, sliding it over the counter like it was no big deal. I held it in both hands, speechless. "I was a teacher for 38 years, he continued. "And I've only met a few people with your kind of spark. Don't let anyone smother it again." That night, I stayed up designing simple labels with the new stamp. "Lemon Love by Hannah." I added little thank you notes to each order. I started getting requests from offices nearby: 30 cookies here, 2 dozen there. I was still baking from my tiny apartment kitchen, still hand-tying each ribbon, still hauling everything to the cafe in tote bags, but it felt like something real now. Like I wasn't just filling a shelf, I was filling hearts. And then one evening, after closing, Denise pulled me aside. "There's a food truck expo coming to town next month," she said. "Lots of small vendors. You should go. Bring your cookies. Let more people taste what you're capable of." I stared at her, wide-eyed. "Me? A food truck? Why not?" she smiled. "You've already built the recipe. Time to dream bigger." That night, I wrote on a new sticky note, dream beyond the shelf. The girl with the bag of leftovers was building something sweet, and this time, everyone could taste it. A week before the food truck expo, I started panicking. I didn't own a truck. I didn't have a license to sell anywhere but the cafe. I didn't even know where to start. I spent 2 nights Googling how to start a food truck and almost talked myself out of it 10 different times. Then Mr. Harold walked in like he always did, ordered his coffee, and sat by the window. I brought him his cup and, without thinking, said, "You ever jump into something way over your head?" He looked at me over his glasses and replied, "Every good story starts that way." I laughed, but the weight didn't leave my chest. I told him about the expo, the food truck idea, and how ridiculous it all felt. I expected him to say I was rushing things or aiming too high. Instead, he leaned forward and said, "Let's take a walk after your shift." So we did. He led me down 3 blocks to a fenced lot behind a mechanic's garage. There, covered in dust and weeds, sat an old cream-colored van with faded paint and a crooked bumper. It looked like it hadn't moved in years. "She belonged to my late wife," he said. "We used to take road trips in this thing before cancer slowed her down. I've been meaning to do something meaningful with it." I turned to him, confused. "I want you to have it," he said. I blinked. "Wait, what?" "Fix her up, turn her into a cookie truck. Let her keep moving through you." I started to protest, but he raised his hand. "I'm not giving it for free. I want 10% of whatever you make this year. And I want 1 cookie a day. Forever." I laughed through the tears that welled in my eyes. We spent the next week cleaning the van. He knew a guy who replaced the tires. Denise's nephew painted a lemon logo on the side and wrote "Sweet Freedom" in bold letters. It wasn't fancy, but it was beautiful. By the time the expo rolled around, I had permits, a cash box, 300 cookies, and the biggest fear I'd ever felt. But Mr. Harold stood beside the van that morning, holding 2 coffees and smiling like I'd already won something. "Go make someone's day," he said. That day, I did. I sold out before noon. A local magazine snapped photos. Kids danced around the truck like it was an ice cream stand. A woman offered to book me for her wedding. That night, back in my apartment, I looked at the old sticky notes on my wall and added a new one, "Sweet Freedom Rolls." Not long ago, I was handed a bag of cold leftovers. Now, I was serving warm cookies from a truck that carried a dream, and a legacy, down every street we touched. The weeks after the expo were a blur of flour, laughter, and long lines. I parked Sweet Freedom outside parks, schools, and weekend markets. Kids ran up to the window with crumpled dollar bills. Parents smiled like they were tasting memories. Office workers came during lunch breaks and left with boxes. Even tourists took photos next to the lemon logo. Every time someone said, "These are the best cookies I've ever had," I'd smile and say, "They're made with a little heartbreak and a lot of butter." Mr. Harold rode along with me some days. He kept a folding chair in the back of the truck and read books between stops. He told anyone who asked that he was the silent partner, and always made sure his daily cookie was fresh and warm. We started experimenting with flavors. Lavender shortbread. Maple pecan. Chocolate chunk with a pinch of sea salt. I listened closely to feedback and made changes when needed. My old notebook, the one with my grandma's handwriting, now had pages full of notes in my own. People began following the truck on social media. One woman made a fan page. A local morning show reached out for an interview. I said yes, nervously, and wore my best sweater. When the host asked, "What made you start all this?" I paused and simply said, "I got tired of waiting for love at someone else's table, so I baked my own." After that interview aired, Sweet Freedom got even busier. I had to hire help, 2 high school girls from the neighborhood who reminded me a little of me, just earlier in life. Quiet. Eager. Underestimated. One afternoon, after a long day parked outside a street fair, I sat in the back of the truck with Mr. Harold, splitting a sandwich. "I never thought I'd get here," I said. "You didn't get here," he replied. You built here. I looked out the back doors of the truck at the line of customers still waiting. My heart felt full, like all those years of being passed over had been compost for something beautiful. Something blooming. That night, I added another sticky note to the wall, from leftovers to legacy. This wasn't just about cookies anymore. It was about reclaiming every ounce of love I never got and turning it into something warm, golden, and unforgettable. And Sweet Freedom, once an old dusty van, had become a rolling reminder that healing doesn't always look like an apology. Sometimes, it looks like a line of strangers waiting for your next batch. The invitation came in a pale yellow envelope, tucked under the windshield wiper of Sweet Freedom one morning. At first, I thought it was a parking ticket. I groaned and yanked it off the glass, only to realize it had gold lettering and a lemon-shaped seal. Inside was a formal letter. You've been selected to showcase your business at the annual Small Business Spotlight Fair. It was one of the biggest local events of the year. Thousands of attendees. News coverage. Real investors. I stared at it for 5 full minutes before I even breathed. That night, I called Mr. Harold. Do you think I'm ready for something this big? He didn't even pause. You were ready the moment you chose yourself. So I said yes. The fair was held in the city square, where string lights hung between trees and rows of booths lined the sidewalks. I wore my yellow apron and baked for 3 days straight leading up to it. The smell of lemon and vanilla clung to everything I owned. When the big day arrived, I parked Sweet Freedom right at the entrance. I decorated the window with fresh flowers and photos of the early cookie days at the cafe. I set out samples, tied with ribbon, and placed a jar labeled "What Brings You Joy" for people to drop little notes in. By noon, there was a line down the block. People took selfies in front of the truck. Children dragged their parents over. I saw familiar faces, Denise, Miss Judy, even my landlord. Then I saw a few men in suits step up. One of them took a bite, turned to the other, and whispered something. I could feel the nerves buzzing in my chest. Later, an announcer walked up with a clipboard and said, "You're one of the 5 finalists. Judges want to hear your story. On stage. In 10 minutes." I almost backed out. My hands were shaking. I looked down at the sticky note I brought in my pocket, "Build something that belongs to you." So I stepped onto the stage. I told them everything. The dinner. The cold stare. The bag of leftovers. The cookies. The kindness of a retired teacher. The way I rebuilt something from scraps of myself. I didn't cry, but I came close. When I finished, people clapped. Some stood. The judges nodded quietly. I didn't win the grand prize. But I won something better. That night, Sweet Freedom was featured in the city paper. The headline read, "She turned rejection into recipes, and the city is eating it up." I added one more sticky note to my wall, "Tell your story, even if your voice shakes." Because sometimes, the world isn't ignoring you. It's just waiting for you to speak. It was a cool Saturday afternoon when I saw them again, my mom and Melissa. Sweet Freedom was parked at the weekend farmers market, right near the front. Business had been steady all morning. I was restocking the cookie trays when I noticed 2 familiar figures standing a few feet away, studying the chalkboard menu. Melissa still had that perfect hair, flawless makeup, and expensive sunglasses perched on her head. My mom stood beside her in a beige coat I hadn't seen before. They looked exactly the same. Like nothing had changed. I froze for a second, unsure what to do. Part of me wanted to hide in the back. Another part wanted them to see. Melissa stepped forward first. "Hi. Are these yours?" I nodded. "Yeah. All of them." She tilted her head. "Hannah, right?" My mom looked up then, really looked at me. Her mouth opened slightly, but she said nothing. No smile. No apology. Just a flash of surprise and maybe, discomfort. Melissa reached for a cookie. "These are all over social media." People say they're amazing. She handed me a $5 bill. I took it without a word. As I passed her the cookie, she added, "I didn't know you baked." I smiled, not wide, just enough. "There's a lot you didn't know." For a moment, no one said anything. My mom kept staring at the truck, eyes scanning the photos and thank you notes stuck to the inside window. Then she finally spoke. "You really made all this?" I nodded again. She hesitated. "Well, good for you." It was a sentence dressed like a compliment, but empty underneath. The kind that tries to sound supportive without admitting anything wrong. They didn't stay long. Melissa took a bite of the cookie and said, "It's good," before turning and walking away. My mom followed, her hands shoved deep in her coat pockets. When they disappeared into the crowd, I felt something unexpected, not sadness, not even anger. Just space. Like a weight had finally rolled off my shoulders. They'd come. They'd seen. And they left with cookies. But I didn't feel small. I didn't feel forgotten. I felt whole. Not because they had changed. But because I had. And Sweet Freedom kept serving, one warm, golden piece of healing at a time. That evening, I sat on the steps at the back of Sweet Freedom, watching the sky turn a soft orange behind the trees. The market had closed, the noise had faded, and all that remained was the quiet hum of crickets in my thoughts. Seeing my mom and Melissa again had stirred something deep. Not the same sting as before, not that aching kind of longing, but more like an echo. I realized I had waited years for one of them to say, "I'm sorry," or even just, "You matter." But it had never come. And now, I didn't need it to. Mr. Harold joined me, carrying 2 paper cups of warm cider. "Saw them," he said, sitting beside me. I nodded. "Yeah." He didn't ask what they said. He didn't need to. "You okay?" he asked instead. "I am," I answered. More than I expected to be. I told him how their visit felt like a test, and how it proved I'd finally stopped shrinking myself to fit into their world. I'd built a new one. One where I didn't have to earn love with silence or good behavior. One where I could breathe. The next morning, I wrote a new sticky note before heading out. Healing isn't loud, it's choosing yourself quietly, again and again. I also decided to write a letter. Not to my mom or Melissa, but to myself. I thanked the version of me who walked away from that dinner table, who started with nothing but a few recipes and a broken heart. I told her she didn't need anyone's permission to grow. She never did. At the next weekend market, a young girl and her dad came up to the truck. The girl was holding a notebook, spiral-bound, just like mine had been. "Are you Hannah?" she asked shyly. I smiled. "That's me." She held out a cookie wrapped in tissue paper. "I made this for you. My own recipe." I took it, eyes stinging. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Her dad added, "She saw your story in the paper. Told me she wants to start her own cart one day." I looked at the little girl, so full of hope, and saw myself, not the girl waiting for a car or crumbs of attention, but the one who had finally stood tall. That night, I thought about legacy, not in the big, flashy sense, but the quiet legacy of kindness. Of cookies. Of creating space for others who once felt invisible. That autumn morning felt different. The air was crisp, leaves turning gold as I unlocked Sweet Freedom before dawn. I carried a basket of cookies, lavender shortbread, vanilla maple twists, and a new batch of cinnamon sugar stars, each one baked with the hope that someone's day would brighten. The first customers arrived before sunrise, joggers with headphones, parents pushing strollers, and the elderly couple who'd been my first regulars at the cafe. I smiled at each face, feeling a familiar thrill of joy. This little truck, once nothing but an abandoned van, had become my stage, where every cookie was a moment of connection, every sale a spark of shared happiness. I thought of my grandmother, how her gentle wisdom had guided me back to my own worth. I thought of Mr. Harold, whose belief had unlocked my courage. I thought of the sticky notes on my wall, Build something that belongs to you, dream beyond the shelf, healing isn't loud. As the morning sun climbed, I watched the line grow around the block. A local radio station had sent a reporter. She recorded me talking about recipes and resilience. I spoke about how I'd transformed rejection into richness, not just financial wealth, but the wealth of purpose and community. I felt powerful, grounded by every obstacle I'd overcome. Midday brought the moment I'd been waiting for. A young woman approached with her daughter clutching a notebook. The girl looked at me shyly. "Miss Hannah," she asked. "I started my own recipe book because of you." She handed me a page filled with colorful drawings of cookies. My eyes stung with tears of pride. At that instant, I knew my journey had come full circle. The little girl's dream mirrored mine, to turn passion into purpose, to find happiness through creating something of our own. That feeling, seeing someone else inspired by my story, was the greatest reward of all. I closed the truck window and called to Mr. Harold, who sat on his folding chair, reading his newspaper. He walked over and slipped a hand on my shoulder. "Well done," he whispered. I took a deep breath of the autumn air and felt a calm wisdom settle inside me. I'd built more than a cookie business. I'd built a legacy of joy, generosity, and self-belief. And now, I invite you to join us on this journey. Subscribe to our channel, hit that like button, and discover how you, too, can turn life's leftovers into something truly sweet.